Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's an honor to get up and make my first budget speech on behalf of Skeena-Bulkley Valley. And it's quite the auspicious event because this is everything that the Prime Minister promised not to deliver. The Prime Minister promised less spending and more fiscal responsibility, but reversed himself once elected. I mean, this budget 2025, has brought Canadian debt up to $1.35 trillion. That's a number that's pretty hard to visualize for the average Canadian, let alone a new MP. The interest payments alone on this debt, just for 2025-2026, is $55.6 billion. That's more than the health transfer agreement. That's more than what the Canadian government collects on GST. In fact, this budget, for all the younger people watching this, because it's going to be their debt, this budget adds $10 million to our debt every hour. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about specific items in the budget that relate directly to my constituents in Skeena-Bulkley Valley. And one of them in particular is the firearms confiscation program put together by the Liberal government. Now, the overall budget for this program is $742 million, and this budget actually earmarks $38.7 million for their pilot project in Cape Breton. But even the Liberal minister himself responsible for this program said that it will not work, and it's a political stunt, and that he'd bail his friend out of jail if these provisions ever actually affected his friend or his tenant that was renting his property. And I think everyone's aware now that even the Liberal minister responsible for this confiscation program doesn't even support the program. But what I want to talk to Canadians about are the penalties. Because overnight, what this Liberal government has done is basically criminalized law-abiding citizens. Citizens that actually lawfully and legally registered their guns, got their PALs, and obeyed the law. And just because of this one piece of legislation, they're turned into criminals overnight. And the penalties for not abiding by these, and this includes Indigenous people as well, Indigenous hunters, Indigenous sport shooters. If you don't abide by this legislation, you could face up to 5 years in prison as an indictable offense. And as a summary conviction, up to 2 years less a day. This is for law-abiding citizens. I mean, the elbows up strategy is missing Trump and hitting Canadians, law-abiding Canadians. This doesn't make any sense. If you're going to crack down on crime, go after criminals. And by the way, criminals don't register their guns. They don't get licenses. And the amount of money that you're spending on this program, $742 million, that could go towards programs for Canadians. It could go towards seniors. It could go towards youth. It could go towards our economy. It could pay down our debt, God forbid. But it doesn't make sense for people that inherited firearms, purchased firearms, or sports shooters, to have to turn their guns in on a voluntary basis and receive $1,300 per firearm, especially when some of these firearms are a lot more expensive than that. The cost of groceries is up, and it's going to keep going up. And the Prime Minister said that he wants to be judged on based on the prices at the grocery store. Well, the verdict is in. He's guilty of doing nothing. In fact, as prices go up, food banks are increasing the usage. So as seniors flock to the food banks, and middle income people flock to the food banks, over 2 million in Canada, 700,000 of which are children, this Liberal government proudly gets up and talks about their contribution to food banks instead of fixing the root cause. They've stunted the economy, they've increased taxes, and there's more on the way. Their packaging tax. Everybody's talking about how this packaging tax is going to increase costs at the grocery store. And there's another tax coming that this government failed to talk to Canadians about. The International Maritime Organization's carbon tax on shipping. Voted in favor of it. It's not official yet, but it's Canada's intention to vote in favor of this shipping tax that will raise costs for goods and groceries for Canadians. I want to talk briefly about the decriminalization experiment that happened in BC while I was an MLA in BC. And it turned BC into a haven for drug use, even to the point where federal dollars were used to purchase hydromorphone and distribute it unmanaged, unchecked. And that started making it into our general population. This experiment that they used on British Columbians, that Oregon actually got rid of because it didn't work, is going to take decades to recover from. This is going to be a generational issue for us as leaders, as legislatures. This experiment wasn't needed. Not when Oregon had already tried it and failed and got rid of it. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, contrary to popular opinion, the emissions cap is not gone. But if all the other mechanisms mentioned in the budget fail, the emissions cap will be enforced on the Canadian resource economy. And that will limit this Liberal government's plans to turn Canada into an energy superpower, as well as turn us into the best performing country in the G7. Which, by the way, if you want to be the best performing country in the G7, you have to outperform the United States, the largest economy in the G7, if not the world. You're going to have to do 100 times better than what you're doing now, and you're going to have to get rid of the legislation that limits our economy if you want to be that energy superpower or a good performing country in the G7. And you can't do it by actually allowing all these tariffs to take hold in our economy. The United States alone. Softwood lumber tariffs, 45%. Reciprocal tariffs, 25 to 35%. Steel tariffs. The list goes on and on and on. India has imposed 30% tariffs on yellow peas. China, 100% tariffs on canola oil, peas, pork and seafood, canola seed. The list goes on and on. I'm not a banker. I didn't even graduate high school, but I'm pretty sure I could have got a better deal than this. I mean, what was the strategy? The strategy of allowing an ad by the Ontario government to air in the United States, to anger the United States even further, and then have the United States stop all negotiations on trade? Please explain to me the strategy behind that. And by the way, when after the Prime Minister saw that ad and allowed it to air, BC was going to do the same, but BC declined later, saying that they were going to align themselves with Canada's strategy on trade. So what's the strategy? Because the strategy so far is putting so much pressure on Canadians. It's stunting our economy. And I haven't even talked yet about the Arctic sovereignty that Russia and China have got their eyes on, that the United States has their eyes on. You've got a sovereignty clause in there, but you haven't mentioned the Northwest Passage, which Russia has eyes on to ship goods on and drill for oil and gas. We're a mess, and this budget proves it. And this is why I cannot support the budget put forward for 2025. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Madawaska-Restigouche.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague is criticizing the
budget, but it makes generational investment while still protecting our social programs. I'd like to ask him, if it had been a Conservative government, what social programs would he would have wanted to cut? Would it have been the CCB that affects 6 million children, or the National Food Program that is now permanent and can feed thousands of children? Or did he want to take an axe to our affordable daycare program that benefits more than 900,000 children, or perhaps the dental program that helps thousands of Canadians as well? So we've made generational investments while still protecting important social programs. Does my colleague, would he want to see these programs disappear if he's criticizing the budget? Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, this is parallel to what we did in my small native village, which was in worse shape than what Canada's facing right now in terms of the social issues. And no, we wouldn't have cut the social programs. We would have fixed the root causes. We wouldn't have added to it like what this Liberal government has done. In fact, what they're saying is, hold my beer, we're going to actually double down on what we've already done to the Canadian public. And I can't support that.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Beauport, Salaberry-Soulanges. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question for my colleague will be rather simple. The Finance Minister from Quebec has shown how disappointed he is in this budget because there's no real funding that will be transferred to the provinces for infrastructure programs. Today, we know to build a hospital, it costs roughly $400 billion. We saw this in Quebec with the CHUM. But does he think it's normal that during a crisis, a budgetary crisis, that Ottawa is not transferring enough for the provinces to invest in their infrastructure?
The Honourable Member for Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, the member, for the excellent question, and I agree. In fact, if you do want to be the best performing country in the G7, it's got to be functioning at all levels, and infrastructure is a key point. You can't be a best performing country if you don't take the people along with you. And that includes economy, social issues, and health. I totally agree with the member. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Caribou, Prince George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to our honourable colleague for the wisdom that he shares all the time. I've known him for a long time. He's a leader within our region, he's a leader within our province, and he's a leader in our country, and I deeply respect his comments. Mr. Speaker, through you, I want to ask our honourable colleague, because our ridings are neighbouring, and so we face many of the same problems. Just last night, I received word that another mill closure in my riding, 165 jobs in a small community in my riding. That's 165 families that are facing uncertainty. But I also want to talk about the mental health and addictions crisis that we are facing. There was a 500-page budget tabled just the other day, and mental health and addictions combined were mentioned 6 times. No new money. We now spend more money servicing our debt down on healthcare transfers to our provinces. That's shameful. I want to ask our honourable colleague for his views on that.
The Honourable Member for Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Thank you very much for the question from my colleague. And yes, coming from a small First Nation reserve, I understand mental health and drug addictions, as well as the substance abuse issues. And we tried to battle that as much as we could without government support. The experiment that they actually did in BC to decriminalize drugs between Ottawa and BC was a disaster. By the way, as an MLA in the BC legislature, I tried to fight as hard as I could to get treatment centers in our region. And we got rejected, even though Indigenous leaders were the ones putting together the plans. We've got a huge problem across Canada. And it's a shame that the Canadian Liberal government doesn't recognize this and try to address it head on.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Corky Alberni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank my colleague. We may disagree on how we proceed to deal with the mental health and the toxic drug crisis. But one thing we can agree on is that this Liberal government has failed to show any leadership. In fact, I raised the fact that over 52,000 Canadians have died of toxic overdoses in this House yesterday. The response from the Liberal government is provincial and territorial. Basically, they're abandoning any leadership role, Mr. Speaker. And there's things that we can agree on. But maybe through you, Mr. Speaker, to my colleague, does he agree with me that the federal government absolutely has a role and responsibility when it comes to the mental health and the toxic drug crisis in this country?
The Honourable Member for Senior Bulkley Valley in about 20 or 25 seconds or less.
I totally agree with my colleague that Ottawa does have a role to play. In fact, if that wasn't the case, why did they impose this drug experiment in BC? Decriminalizing heroin, cocaine, fentanyl, 2.5 grams of it. 2.5 grams of fentanyl could kill the normal person. So Ottawa does have a role to play in the drug crisis that we're facing.